Today, we're going to talk about some language learning advice that can really help you become a better English speaker. Whether you're just starting or you've been learning for a while, these 7 tips will help make learning easier and faster. And who doesn't want that? Today is really about pulling them together into a single place, a single lesson. And these ideas come from a number of places. My own experience, from experienced teachers and communicators, or from research I've done on language learning. They will help you learn to speak a new language. So, let's get started. 7 shortcuts to faster English fluency. We will help you to speak English fluently. All you have to do is listen. So start listening now and find out how it works. Number 1. Grammar mistakes are okay in spoken English. Expect them. If you're applying for a job or writing an important letter or filling in a form, then grammar mistakes are probably not okay. In these situations, you have time to check your written English is correct. And a prospective employer or someone looking at your CV will expect perfect English grammar, probably. But you'll notice that in the real world, in everyday conversations, grammar is less important. What is important? The message you're trying to communicate. You're getting stuck in. You're having a go. You're willing to speak to people, even though your language isn't perfect and you make mistakes. It takes a bit of courage, but this courage is worthwhile. You'll become comfortable with speaking much more quickly if you take this approach. Just go for it. Don't worry about making mistakes. You will make mistakes. Doesn't matter. Imagine you're ordering coffee and you say, "I want 2 cups of coffees. No sugar, please." Even if grammatically the correct phrase is, "I would like 2 cups of coffee with no sugar," please, the barista will still understand you perfectly. It's much more important that you're willing to speak, willing to make mistakes. And if the barista, that's the word for the expert, that makes your coffee in the coffee shop, doesn't understand you, you can just find a different way of saying it. So focus on communicating your needs, on what you want, rather than on whether your grammar is perfect or not. Practice ordering food, asking for directions, or describing your day on your own first if necessary. Have the courage to make mistakes, and your English speaking will progress more quickly. Number 2. Remember, native speakers aren't perfect. English speakers are always making mistakes, common ones. It's more important that the person you're speaking to understands what you're saying. For example, you might hear a native speaker say, "Me and my friend are going to the cinema," instead of the grammatically correct, "My friend and I are going to the cinema." If you want a practical application here, listen to casual conversations between native speakers. See if you can notice any grammar errors and notice how they don't stop communication. Number 3. Flexible communication, not rehearsed perfection. You'll realize that you can say a lot with simple English words and phrases. Of course, it's nice to have creative, interesting, or technical words in your vocabulary, but it's not that important if you're just starting to speak in English. For example, instead of struggling to find the perfect word, we're talking here about using simpler terms. If you can't remember how to say dehydrated, you can just say, "I need water," or "I'm very thirsty." Practice explaining complex ideas using simple words, simplifying in other words. Try describing your job or the plot of a film or TV program using only basic vocabulary, possibly words just from the most common 500 words. Number 4. Learn phrasal verbs and idioms. You might have heard about Pareto principle, commonly known as the 80-20 rule. It's named after Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto. He observed in 1896 that approximately 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population, and that this 80-20 rule is found to be true about many things. For example, in business, it's often true that 80% of sales come from 20% of customers. So this principle suggests that for many things, about 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. So again here, you don't need to know huge numbers of phrasal verbs and idioms. Instead, it's worth learning just the common ones. That's what we do. Work smart and learn efficiently. Only what you need to learn. For example, if you get out of bed in the morning, we say, "You got up?" And if you put on your clothes, we say, "You got dressed." In conversation, these are the phrases that we use all the time for those activities. You don't need anything more complicated, but they are phrasal verbs that you'll probably have to learn. So, phrasal verbs and idioms in English, there are a lot of them. We will talk about some common idioms and phrases in upcoming videos. Number 5. Using versus learning a language. If you've listened to Meenakshi English stories for any length of time, you'll know that our advice is that listening is by far the most important part of learning. But at some point, when you're ready, you're going to need to actually open your mouth and say things. Get started on speaking, even if it's initially speaking to yourself for practice. For example, you might know the past tense rules, but you struggle to use them in conversation. Your brain doesn't deliver them quickly enough. Why not practice by narrating your day? This morning, I woke up at 7 a.m. I ate my breakfast, and then I went to work. At lunchtime, I had a really interesting conversation with, and so on. For every grammar rule you learn, try creating 5 to 10 sample sentences about your life and practice saying them out loud. Number 6. Use the shadowing technique. This technique really helps language learners with their pronunciation and fluency. Shadowing really just means listening to spoken English and repeating what you hear. But it's much more powerful than that sounds. People learning a language can always understand much more than they can say. So, you may think a sentence is easy when you hear it and understand it, but pronouncing it correctly and saying it quickly enough can be a challenge. So, shadowing can help with this. For example, you can use this shadowing technique with your favorite English podcast. Play a short segment, pause, and then try and repeat exactly what you heard, mimicking the speaker's intonation and rhythm. And you could even record yourself speaking English for 2 to 3 minutes each day. Copy what a native speaker speaking English says, listen back, and you'll soon hear the differences, the areas for improvement. Number 7. Master the art of language chunking. One of the most powerful techniques for rapidly improving your English fluency is chunking. That's C-H-U-N-K. This method involves learning and using common phrases or chunks of language, rather than focusing on individual words or grammar rules. We talk in English about pineapple chunks. Maybe that will help you remember the word chunking. Think of this as being a toolkit, where you've got a list of ready-made phrases, chunks if you like. So this method involves learning and using common phrases or chunks of language, rather than focusing on individual words or grammar rules. This helps your fluency, it helps your understanding. You'll start recognizing these chunks in native speech and improving your listening skills. It reduces the mental effort. Instead of constructing sentences word by word, you can use these ready-made chunks, freeing up mental resources for more complicated aspects of communicating. It also boosts your confidence. Having a repertoire of chunks allows you to express yourself more easily. Some examples of useful chunks are, in my opinion, to be honest, the thing is, I couldn't agree more. That reminds me of, I see what you mean. But you could create a chunk journal. Write down useful chunks of English that you meet in your reading or your listening practice. Use these chunks in sentences and try creating mini dialogues that use them. Use spaced repetition. Review and practice the chunks in your journal regularly so that you learn them. Chunking bridges the gap between textbook learning and real-world communication, so it's a valuable tool. Remember, language learning is about communication, having a go, not perfection. Focus on expressing yourself as clearly as you can. Practice regularly and don't be afraid of mistakes. Keep learning, stay motivated, and enjoy it. Thank you for joining today's lesson and happy learning. Enough for now. Have a lovely day. See you in next lesson.